The crisp autumn breeze rustled through the oak trees surrounding Meadowbrook Stables, where a once legendary racehorse stood alone in a weathered paddock. Thunderbolt, his coat no longer gleaming with the luster of championship days, grazed quietly in the corner, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. His powerful muscles, which had once carried him to countless victories, had softened with age and neglect. 20 yards away, Ethan Parker leaned against his truck, his weathered hands gripping a thermos of coffee as he watched the horse he'd once known better than himself. The lines around his eyes had deepened since their glory days, etched by both time and the weight of decisions he'd rather forget. His leg, permanently marked by the injury that ended his career, ached with the morning chill. "He's different now," Martha, the stable hand, said softly as she approached. "Most days he just stands there, barely acknowledges anyone. Hard to believe this is the same horse that won the Triple Crown." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I remember when his eyes used to light up at the mere sight of the track. Now," he trailed off, watching as Thunderbolt lifted his head briefly before returning to his listless grazing. The morning sun caught the few remaining flecks of gold in Thunderbolt's predominantly gray coat, a painful reminder of his faded glory. Here was a horse that had once commanded the attention of thousands, whose very presence in a race would send bookmakers scrambling to adjust their odds. Now he barely lifted his head when visitors approached. "You know," Martha continued, her voice gentle, "sometimes I tell the younger stable hands about your stories together, about how you two seem to read each other's minds on the track. But looking at him now—" She shook her head, unable to reconcile the legendary tales with the withdrawn creature before them. Ethan's fingers unconsciously traced the scar on his leg, a permanent reminder of the fall that had changed everything. The accident that had not only ended his career, but had forced him to sell Thunderbolt, severing a partnership that had seemed unbreakable. Now, standing here 5 years later, the distance between them felt greater than ever. Before we dive deeper into this emotional journey of a bond tested by time, tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed a story of an unbreakable connection between man and animal. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Ethan's routine was interrupted by an unexpected letter. The elegant envelope stood out among the usual bills and junk mail, its gold embossing catching the light. His hands, calloused from years of farm work, seemed out of place against the fine paper as he carefully opened it. "Dear Mr. Parker," he read aloud, his voice echoing in the quiet kitchen, "we cordially invite you to attend the prestigious Champions Legacy Gala, celebrating the greatest partnerships in racing history." His eyes skimmed down to the details, a black tie event at the renowned Windsor Racing Club, where racing royalty would gather to honor the legends of the sport. The coffee in his mug grew cold as he read and reread the invitation. 5 years had passed since he'd been part of that world. These days, his life revolved around teaching beginner riding lessons and helping local farmers with their horses. The glitz and glamour of professional racing seemed like a distant dream. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom Reynolds, his old racing manager. "Got your invitation yet? Hard to believe it's been 5 years. You should come, Ethan. Everyone's asking about you." Ethan's thumb hovered over the reply button when another message came through. "By the way, thought you should know, they're bringing Thunderbolt too. New owner finally agreed. Might be the last time some of these champions appear in public." The news hit him like a physical blow. Thunderbolt would be there. The same horse who hadn't recognized him just days ago would be paraded in front of the racing elite. His chest tightened at the thought. "I don't know, Tom," he typed back. "That's not my world anymore." But even as he sent the message, memories flooded back. The roar of the crowd, the thundering of hooves, the perfect synchronization he'd shared with Thunderbolt as they crossed finish line after finish line. Martha's voice from their conversation at the stable echoed in his mind. He's different now. Would the racing community see that too? Would they whisper about how far the mighty had fallen? The invitation sat on his kitchen table all day, demanding an answer. As evening approached, Ethan found himself pulling out an old photo album. There they were, younger versions of himself and Thunderbolt, draped in roses after their Kentucky Derby win. The horse's eyes had blazed with life then, matching the triumphant smile on Ethan's face. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca, his sister. "Just heard about the gala. You have to go, E. Maybe seeing everyone again. Maybe seeing him again. It might help both of you." Ethan picked up the invitation one more time, running his fingers over the embossed lettering. Finally, he reached for his phone and typed a short message to the organizers. "I'll be there." Sometimes the hardest steps are the ones that lead us back to our past, and Ethan was about to discover just how challenging this particular journey would be. The week before the gala, Ethan found himself in his attic, dust dancing in the afternoon light as he opened boxes he hadn't touched in years. Each item he pulled out unleashed a flood of memories. Racing silk still carrying the faint scent of victory, trophies that had once seemed so important, and photographs that transported him back to another life. At the bottom of one box, he found it. The halter Thunderbolt had worn during their first win together. His fingers traced the worn leather, remembering how the story had begun. He'd been just a rookie jockey then, and Thunderbolt was the horse nobody wanted to ride. "He's too wild," they'd said, "too unpredictable." The trainer had warned Ethan against even trying. But there had been something in Thunderbolt's eyes that first day, a fire, an intelligence that spoke to something deep within Ethan's soul. "I remember our first morning together," Ethan murmured to himself, lost in the memory. "You nearly threw me 3 times. He chuckled, remembering how the powerful bay stallion had bucked and twisted, testing his new rider's resolve. But Ethan had held on, and something magical had happened that day. A partnership was born. Their rise had been meteoric. From small local races to the biggest stages in the sport, Thunderbolt and Ethan moved as one. The horse seemed to anticipate Ethan's every command before it was given, responding to the slightest shift in weight, the gentlest touch of the reins. "They called us the dynamic duo," he remembered, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Parker and Thunderbolt strike again. Unbeatable partnership takes Triple Crown." Those had been the glory days, when anything seemed possible. But success had come with a price. The pressure to maintain their winning streak had been intense. More races, faster times, bigger purses. Then came that fateful day at Belmont. The day everything changed. Ethan's hand unconsciously moved to his leg as the memory surfaced. The track had been wet from morning rain. They were leading by 2 lengths when Thunderbolt's hoof slipped. The fall had been devastating. Ethan could still hear the collective gasp of the crowd, feel the sickening impact as he hit the ground. The doctors had done their best, but the damage was done. 3 surgeries later, it was clear his racing days were over. The medical bills had mounted, and with no income from racing, Ethan had faced an impossible choice. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered to the empty attic, the words he'd said to Thunderbolt the day he'd signed the sale papers echoing in his mind. "I never wanted to let you go." The new owner had promised to take good care of Thunderbolt, to maintain his legacy. But standing in that dusty attic, surrounded by the remnants of their shared glory, Ethan wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. A tear splashed onto the leather halter, and Ethan quickly wiped his eyes. The past was the past, but seeing Thunderbolt at the gala would open all these old wounds again. Was he really ready to face that? The week before the gala rushed by in a blur of preparations and rising anxiety. Ethan stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting a borrowed tuxedo that felt like a costume from someone else's life. His silver-flecked hair had been neatly trimmed, but his hands, rough from years of farm work, told the true story of where he belonged now. "You clean up nice," his sister Rebecca said from the doorway, a gentle smile on her face. "Almost looks like the old days." She stepped forward to straighten his bow tie, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. "Have you heard anything more about Thunderbolt?" Ethan's expression tightened. "Tom called yesterday. Says he's not doing well at his new stable. Barely responds to anyone. Doesn't even show interest in running anymore. He paused, his voice dropping. They say he's just going through the motions like some kind of living ghost. Rebecca's hands stilled on his tie. That doesn't sound like the horse I remember. The one who used to practically break down his stall door when he heard your footsteps in the morning. That was a lifetime ago, Becca. Ethan turned away from the mirror, picking up a small wooden box from his dresser. Inside lay their most precious victory, the gold winner's pin from their Triple Crown triumph. His new owner, Harrison Wells, he's turned Thunderbolt into a showpiece, parades him out at events like tomorrow night, but the rest of the time, he shook his head, unable to finish the thought. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan's leg was aching more than usual, a reminder of why everything had changed. He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, the wooden box still in his hands. What if he doesn't remember me at all, Becca? What if tomorrow night, I'm just another stranger to him? The fear that had been building all week finally surfaced in his voice. Rebecca sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Ethan, some bonds can't be broken. Not really. Even if Thunderbolt seems different now, somewhere inside him is the champion who trusted you more than anyone else in the world. You didn't see him at the stable last week, Ethan argued. His eyes were empty, like someone had turned out the lights inside him. The fire that made him special, it's just gone. Maybe, Rebecca said softly, or maybe it's just waiting for the right person to rekindle it. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from Tom. Just saw Thunderbolt arrive at Windsor. Thought you should know, he's looking pretty rough. Harrison's been pushing him hard for tomorrow's presentation. Don't expect too much, old friend. Ethan's jaw clenched as he read the message. The thought of Thunderbolt being pushed beyond his limits at his age made his blood boil. But what could he do? He wasn't part of that world anymore. Tomorrow night, he would just be another guest, watching from the sidelines as his former partner was paraded around like a relic of the past. Windsor Racing Club glowed like a jewel against the darkening sky, its historic facade illuminated by elegant spotlights. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, depositing racing royalty onto a red carpet that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the grand entrance. The air hummed with excited chatter and the subtle clicks of photographers' cameras. Ethan's borrowed truck seemed woefully out of place among the Mercedes and Bentleys. He sat in the parking lot, gathering his courage, watching as familiar faces from his past life emerged from their vehicles. Former competitors, now older but still carrying themselves with the distinctive grace of career jockeys, nodded in recognition as they passed. "Ethan Parker!" A booming voice caught his attention as he finally made his way toward the entrance. Richard Montgomery, one of the sport's most respected trainers, was striding toward him with open arms. "My God, it's been too long! Still keeping up with the circuit?" "Not really," Ethan admitted, accepting the man's enthusiastic handshake. "Different life now." His eyes scanned the crowded foyer beyond, searching for any sign of Thunderbolt. "He's in the East Wing stable," Richard said quietly, noting Ethan's distraction. "They're bringing him out later for the ceremony." There was something in his tone that made Ethan's stomach tighten. The main ballroom was a symphony of crystal and gold, with elaborate floral arrangements centered on each table. Historic racing photographs lined the walls, including one that made Ethan's heart skip. Himself and Thunderbolt crossing the finish line at Churchill Downs, both of them younger, stronger, unaware of what the future held. "Mr. Parker?" A young woman in a sleek black dress approached, press badge glinting at her collar. "I'm Lila Chen from Racing Today. I was hoping to get your thoughts on tonight's reunion with Thunderbolt. It's quite the story, the champion pair, separated by circumstance, meeting again after all these years." Before Ethan could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The large double doors at the far end of the ballroom had opened, and handlers were leading in the first of the evening's equine guests. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the distinctive white blaze on a dark face. But the horse that entered wasn't the proud champion he remembered. Thunderbolt's head hung low, his steps measured and uncertain. The once gleaming coat was dull, and though he'd been groomed for the occasion, nothing could hide the profound weariness in his bearing. "Oh my," Lila whispered, her journalist's detachment slipping. "Is that really him? The great Thunderbolt?" Ethan couldn't speak. His hands clenched at his sides as he watched his former partner being led to a specially designated area where the gathered crowd could admire him. Harrison Wells, Thunderbolt's current owner, stood nearby, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about victories he'd had no part in winning. "Would you like to go closer?" Lila asked gently, noticing Ethan's distress. "I could arrange—" "Not yet," Ethan managed, his voice rough. I need a minute." But even as he turned away, he caught Thunderbolt's eye for just a moment. There was no spark of recognition, no sign that the horse remembered the countless mornings they'd shared, the victories they'd celebrated, the trust they'd built. Just emptiness, and something that looked remarkably like defeat. The evening progressed with all the pomp and ceremony the racing world was known for, but Ethan barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on Thunderbolt, watching from a distance as various guests approached to admire what remained of the legendary champion. Each time someone posed for a photo beside the horse, Ethan's heart clenched at Thunderbolt's vacant expression. "He's been like this for months now," a stable hand confided to Ethan as he passed with a tray of champagne. "Mr. Wells keeps hoping he'll snap out of it. But honestly, sir, I think the old boy's just given up." Ethan finally mustered the courage to approach, his steps slow and deliberate. Harrison Wells was in the midst of regaling a group of investors with tales of Thunderbolt's greatest victories, stories he'd only read about, never witnessed firsthand. The man's voice faltered slightly as he noticed Ethan's approach. "Ah, Mr. Parker, the man himself," Wells called out, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Come to see your old friend? I'm afraid he's not quite the showman he used to be. Age catches up with all of us, doesn't it?" Ethan barely heard him. Standing before Thunderbolt for the first time in 5 years, the changes were even more devastating up close. The proud arch of his neck had disappeared, replaced by a defensive posture that spoke of resignation rather than rest. His eyes, once bright with intelligence and spirit, seemed to look through everything around him. "Hey, boy," Ethan said softly, reaching out a hand. Thunderbolt didn't even flinch, showing neither recognition nor fear. It was as if the gesture meant nothing to him, as if Ethan were just another stranger among many. "We've had the best veterinarians look at him," Wells offered, perhaps sensing Ethan's distress. "Physically, there's nothing wrong. He's just... well, you know how these old champions can be. Sometimes they just lose their spark." "Lose their spark?" Ethan repeated, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "This horse had more spark than any animal I've ever known. He lived for the track, for the competition. This isn't just age, Mr. Wells. This is something else entirely." The crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Lila Chen had edged closer, her recorder discreetly capturing every word. "Now see here, Parker," Wells began, his polite facade slipping slightly. "I've given this horse the best of everything. State-of-the-art stables, premium feed, regular exhibitions to keep him active. If he's not the champion you remember, perhaps that says more about your memory than my care." Ethan's hand dropped to his side as Thunderbolt continued to stare blankly ahead, showing no interest in the mounting argument happening beside him. This wasn't just a horse who had aged or grown tired. This was a spirit that had been broken, a fire that had been systematically extinguished. "You've given him everything," Ethan said quietly, "except what he really needed." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Wells sputtering behind him. But his mind was already racing, forming a plan. Something had to be done, and soon, before the magnificent creature he'd known disappeared completely. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Ethan pulled up to Windsor's stables the next morning. He'd barely slept, haunted by the empty look in Thunderbolt's eyes. Using his old connections, he'd arranged with the stable manager for an early morning visit away from the crowds and cameras. The stable was quiet. Most of the handlers had not yet arrived for their morning duties. Thunderbolt stood in his temporary stall, head lowered, the same defeated posture he'd maintained throughout the previous evening's festivities. "Just you and me now, boy," Ethan said softly, approaching the stall. He carried something in his pocket, the old leather halter from their glory days, worn but still intact. The familiar smell of leather and memories filled the air as he pulled it out. At first, Thunderbolt didn't react, maintaining his statue-like stance. But as Ethan began speaking, telling stories of their shared past, something subtle changed in the horse's bearing. His ear twitched, almost imperceptibly, at the sound of Ethan's voice. "Remember that morning at Keeneland?" Ethan continued, his voice taking on the same soothing rhythm he'd used during their pre-race preparations years ago. "The fog was so thick we could barely see the track. Everyone wanted to scratch, but you were dancing in your stall, ready to run blind if that's what it took." Thunderbolt's head lifted slightly, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the old halter. Ethan's heart leaped at this small sign of interest, the first real response he'd seen from his old partner. "That's it, boy," he encouraged, stepping closer. "You remember, don't you? The way the dirt felt under your hooves, the wind in your mane, the roar of the crowd as you crossed that finish line first, even through the fog." Slowly, with movements gentle enough not to startle, Ethan reached out and placed his hand on Thunderbolt's neck. The horse tensed for a moment, but didn't pull away. Under his palm, Ethan could feel the powerful muscles that had once carried them to victory after victory. "I know I let you down," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I should have found another way, but I'm here now and I'm not giving up on you again." As if responding to the raw honesty in Ethan's voice, Thunderbolt turned his head slightly, his eye meeting Ethan's for the first time since their reunion. There was something there, a flicker of awareness, a ghost of recognition that hadn't been present before. "Mr. Parker?" A stable hand appeared at the doorway, hesitant to interrupt. "Mr. Wells will be here soon for the morning check." Ethan nodded, reluctantly stepping back from the stall. But as he turned to leave, he heard it, a soft nickering sound, so quiet he almost missed it. Thunderbolt had called to him, just as he used to do every morning before their rides. The stable hand's eyes widened. "That's the first sound he's made in weeks," she whispered, amazed. Ethan smiled, hope blooming in his chest. Somewhere inside this defeated creature, his champion still lived. Now he just had to find a way to bring him back completely. Over the next few days, Ethan arrived at the stables before dawn each morning. He'd convinced the stable manager to give him access, promising to be gone before Wells arrived for his usual mid-morning appearances. Each day, he noticed small but significant changes in Thunderbolt's behavior. "There's something different about him," Maria, the night stable hand, commented on the fourth morning. She watched as Thunderbolt lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's truck pulling up. "It's like he's starting to wake up!" Ethan had begun bringing carrots, not the fancy organic ones Wells provided, but the regular kind they'd shared after workouts years ago. At first, Thunderbolt had ignored them, but now he accepted them gently from Ethan's palm, just like old times. "Want to try something, boy?" Ethan asked softly one morning, holding up their old halter. To his amazement, Thunderbolt lowered his head willingly, allowing Ethan to slip it on. The transformation was subtle but immediate, with the familiar leather against his face. The horse's posture straightened slightly, echoing his former proud bearing. Leading him to the small exercise paddock, Ethan noticed more changes. Thunderbolt's steps, though still careful, had lost some of their hesitation. There was a new awareness in his movements, a growing responsiveness to Ethan's gentle guidance. "That's it," Ethan encouraged, as Thunderbolt broke into a light trot, his hooves striking the ground with increasing confidence. "Show them what you still have in you." A small crowd had gathered, stable hands, exercise riders, even a few early arriving trainers. They watched in amazement as Thunderbolt, the horse who had spent months barely moving, began to circle the paddock with growing energy. "Look at that extension," one trainer whispered. "The old boy still got it." Then it happened. As they rounded the far corner of the paddock, something caught Thunderbolt's attention. Perhaps a familiar scent on the breeze or a distant sound. Without warning, he surged forward, breaking into a full gallop that took everyone's breath away. "My God!" someone gasped. "That's the Thunderbolt I remember!" For a brief, glorious moment, the years seemed to fall away. Thunderbolt's muscles rippled beneath his coat. His mane caught the morning light, and his stride opened up to reveal the champion he had once been. Ethan felt tears in his eyes as he watched his partner rediscover himself. The spell was broken by the sound of an approaching car. Wells had arrived early. Ethan quickly led Thunderbolt back to his stall, but there was no hiding the change in the horse. His eyes were brighter, his head held higher, and there was a new energy radiating from him that hadn't been there before. "What's going on here?" Wells demanded, taking in the gathered crowd and Thunderbolt's elevated breathing. "Has someone been exercising my horse without permission?" But even as Wells began to protest, others were already whispering, sharing videos they'd captured of Thunderbolt's remarkable display. The story of the champion's awakening was spreading, and with it, a growing question. Could Thunderbolt, written off as past his prime, be ready for one more moment in the spotlight? "This is completely unacceptable," Wells fumed, pacing the stable office later that morning. "That horse is my property, and no one, especially not a washed-up jockey, has the right to handle him without my explicit permission." Ethan stood his ground even as Wells's words stung. "He needs more than just standing in a stall being admired. He needs purpose, exercise, someone who understands him." "Understand him?" Wells scoffed. "He's a retired racehorse, not a therapy case. And from what I hear, you're the reason he ended up retiring in the first place." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Lila Chen, who had rushed to the stables after hearing about the morning's events, watched the exchange intently from her corner of the office. "You saw him out there," Ethan pressed. "That wasn't just exercise. That was Thunderbolt remembering who he is. When's the last time you saw him move like that?" "It was a fluke," another voice interjected. Dr. Matthews, Wells's personal veterinarian, entered the office with a stern expression. "And a dangerous one at that. That horse hasn't galloped in months. You could have caused serious injury." Ethan turned to face the vet. "The only injury being caused is keeping him confined, killing his spirit day by day. He's not some museum piece to be preserved. He's a racehorse." "Was a racehorse," Wells corrected sharply. "Now he's a valuable piece of racing history, and I won't have you risking his well-being with your sentimental notions." Lila stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "But what about the videos? Everyone can see the difference in him. The way he responded, the energy he showed, that's the story people want to hear." "The story," Wells said coldly, "is that a former jockey overstepped his bounds and will no longer be welcomed on these premises." Ethan felt his heart sink. Being banned from the stables meant being separated from Thunderbolt again, just when they'd started to reconnect. He looked out the office window, where he could see his partner standing alertly in his stall, head raised, watching the doorway as if waiting for him. "You can't just—" he began, but Wells cut him off. "I can and I will. Security has already been notified. If you return, you'll be charged with trespassing." As Ethan turned to leave, Lila caught his arm. "This isn't over," she whispered. "The public won't stand for this once they hear the full story." But Ethan wasn't sure. He'd already lost Thunderbolt once due to circumstances beyond his control. Now it was happening again, and the weight of helplessness pressed down on him like a physical force. Outside, Thunderbolt nickered softly as Ethan walked past his stall for what might be the last time. The sound was like an arrow to his heart, a reminder of what was being taken away, not just from him, but from a champion who had finally started to remember his own greatness. The racing world buzzed with controversy in the days following Ethan's banishment from Windsor Stables. Lila's article, complete with videos of Thunderbolt's remarkable morning display, had gone viral within the racing community. The sight of the retired champion running with his old fire had sparked intense debate about Wells's treatment of the horse. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard Montgomery's voice boomed across the crowded press room at Windsor Racing Club. "In light of recent events and growing public interest, we are proud to announce a special addition to our summer racing calendar, the Champions Legacy Exhibition Race." Camera flashes erupted as Montgomery continued. "This unique event will feature retired champions and their original jockeys in a one-time exhibition race, celebrating the enduring bonds between horse and rider." In the back of the room, Ethan stood quietly, still processing the invitation he'd received that morning. The exhibition race wasn't just an opportunity. It was a chance to prove what he'd known all along about Thunderbolt's remaining spirit. "Mr. Wells," a reporter called out, "will Thunderbolt be participating with his former jockey, Ethan Parker?" All eyes turned to Harrison Wells, who sat stiffly at the conference table. The pressure of public opinion and mounting criticism had forced his hand. "After careful consideration," he said through clearly gritted teeth, "we have agreed to allow Thunderbolt to participate, with Mr. Parker as his rider." The room erupted in excited chatter. Lila, sitting in the front row, couldn't hide her triumphant smile. Her coverage had helped create this moment, forcing Wells to reconsider his stance under the weight of public sentiment. "However," Wells added sharply, "this decision is contingent on a full veterinary examination and strict oversight of any training. We won't risk the horse's health for a publicity stunt." Ethan barely heard the rest of the announcement. His mind was already racing ahead to what this meant. He would have 6 weeks to work with Thunderbolt, to rebuild their partnership, to prove to everyone what he had seen in that early morning workout. As the press conference ended, Richard Montgomery pulled Ethan aside. "You've got one shot at this," he warned quietly. "Make it count. Show them what that horse can still do." Ethan nodded, determination setting his jaw. This wasn't just about proving Wells wrong anymore. It was about giving Thunderbolt one last chance to run with joy, to remind the world why he had been called a champion. The exhibition race would be more than just a celebration of racing's past. It would be Thunderbolt's redemption, and perhaps, in some way, Ethan's too. The morning of the exhibition race dawned clear and cool, the track at Windsor glistening with dew. The grandstands were already filling, buzzing with anticipation for what many were calling the most emotional racing event of the year. In the stables, Ethan stood with Thunderbolt, their preparation ritual as familiar as breathing. The past 6 weeks had been transformative. Despite Wells's restrictions and constant oversight, the bond between horse and rider had deepened with each training session. Thunderbolt's eyes now shone with recognition, his movements carrying echoes of his former grace and power. "You've done amazing work," Maria said softly, helping Ethan with the final preparations. "Even if you don't win today, what you've accomplished is nothing short of miraculous." Ethan ran his hand along Thunderbolt's neck, feeling the strength that had returned to those powerful muscles. "It was never about winning," he replied. "It was about bringing him back to life." The other retired champions were being led to the track, once great horses whose names had filled racing headlines years ago. Their riders, like Ethan, showed the marks of time, but there was no mistaking the excitement in their faces as they prepared for one last ride. "It's time!" called the track steward. Ethan led Thunderbolt out into the morning sunlight, feeling the horse's energy building with each step. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a wave of cheers and applause as they recognized the legendary pair. Mounting proved challenging with his old injury, but Ethan managed it smoothly, settling into the familiar position. Beneath him, Thunderbolt's muscles tensed, ready and waiting. This wasn't the defeated creature from the gala anymore. This was a champion preparing to run. As they approached the starting gate, Wells appeared trackside, his expression tense. "Don't push him too hard," he warned. "This is just an exhibition." But Ethan barely heard him. He and Thunderbolt were already in their own world, that special place where horse and rider became one. The other retired champions lined up beside them, 7 pairs ready to relive their glory days one last time. The starting bell rang, and the gates flew open. Thunderbolt's start was hesitant, the months of inactivity showing as other horses pulled ahead. The crowd's cheering dimmed slightly, seeing their favorite struggling. "Come on, boy," Ethan whispered, leaning forward. "Remember who you are." Something in his voice reached through to Thunderbolt's heart. Halfway down the backstretch, the horse's stride suddenly changed. His neck stretched out, his hooves found their rhythm, and that legendary speed began to return. One by one, they passed the other horses. The crowd's roar grew with each position gained. Thunderbolt wasn't just running now, he was flying. His spirit fully awakened, his heart pounding with the joy of doing what he was born to do. They didn't win. Years of retirement couldn't be completely overcome in 6 weeks. But as they crossed the finish line in third place, the thunder of applause that greeted them wasn't for their position. It was for the miracle they had witnessed. A champion reborn, a partnership restored, and a spirit unbroken. The aftermath of the exhibition race transformed Windsor Racing Club into a scene of pure celebration. Thunderbolt stood in the winner's circle, not as the victor, but as something far more meaningful, a symbol of resilience and revival. His coat gleamed with sweat, his eyes bright with a fire that everyone had thought was lost forever. "Remarkable," Richard Montgomery declared, approaching Ethan as he dismounted. "I've never seen anything like it. That wasn't just a race, that was a resurrection." Cameras flashed and reporters crowded around, all wanting to capture the moment. Lila Chen pushed through, her eyes shining with tears. "The story of the year," she announced, holding up her recorder. "The greatest comeback in racing history." Even Harrison Wells seemed affected by the energy of the moment. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching as Thunderbolt preened under the attention, looking more alive than he had in years. The hard lines of Wells's face had softened somewhat, replaced by a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Parker," Wells called out, gesturing for Ethan to join him away from the crowd. "It seems I may have misjudged the situation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That horse out there today, that's not the same animal I've owned these past few years." "He was always there," Ethan replied quietly. "He just needed someone to remind him." Wells nodded slowly. "I've received several offers for appearance fees at other events. People want to see more of this comeback story." He hesitated before continuing. "But I'm beginning to think perhaps I'm not the right person to guide this next chapter." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Wells drew a folded document from his jacket, "that I've had my lawyers draw up transfer papers. Thunderbolt deserves to be with someone who understands him. The price is reasonable, far below market value considering his heritage." Ethan's hand trembled as he took the papers. The amount was still substantial, but not impossible, especially with the appearance fees Wells mentioned. "Why?" he asked simply. Wells looked back at Thunderbolt, who was still basking in the attention of his admirers. "Because sometimes being a good businessman means knowing when to let go of an investment that would be better served elsewhere." As the implications of this moment sank in, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The dream he'd hardly dared to consider was becoming reality. Thunderbolt could come home. Around them, the celebration continued, but now it carried a deeper meaning. This wasn't just about one remarkable race. It was about a new beginning, a chance to right old wrongs and restore a partnership that should never have been broken. 6 months after the exhibition race, the morning sun rose over a very different scene. Thunderbolt stood in a spacious paddock at Ethan's modest farm, his coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright and alert. The defeated creature from Windsor Stables was nothing but a distant memory. "Look at him now," Rebecca said, joining her brother at the fence. "Hard to believe he's the same horse." She watched as Thunderbolt playfully chased a butterfly, his movements fluid and energetic despite his age. "He's not the same horse," Ethan replied with a smile. "He's better." Since coming home, Thunderbolt has flourished. The mechanical routine of his show horse days had been replaced by a life full of purpose and joy. 3 times a week, they hosted clinics for young riders, with Thunderbolt serving as the star attraction. The once distant champion now gently nuzzled children's hands, seeming to understand his new role as teacher and inspiration. Local news had covered their story, leading to a steady stream of visitors eager to meet the legendary pair. "Did you see today's mail?" Rebecca asked, holding up an envelope. "Another invitation. They want you both at the Kentucky Horse Park next month. Seems your comeback story has sparked a whole movement about retired racehorses." Ethan nodded, watching as Thunderbolt trotted over to greet them. The horse's eyes met his, filled with the trust and intelligence that had made them champions years ago. "We'll go," he said, stroking Thunderbolt's nose. "But on our terms this time. No more show pony routines." Maria, who had left Windsor to work at Ethan's farm, appeared with Thunderbolt's morning feed. "He's got more energy than horses half his age," she commented. "Yesterday, he was showing off for those school kids, doing his own little dressage routine in the paddock." "Because he wants to," Ethan said softly. "Everything he does now, he does by choice. That's what makes the difference." As if to prove the point, Thunderbolt suddenly broke into a gallop, racing along the fence line with pure joy. His stride was still powerful, his head held high with the pride of a true champion. But now there was something else in his bearing, a freedom that came from being exactly where he belonged. "You know," Rebecca mused, "when you first brought him home, I worried it might be too much. The responsibility, the costs, the time involved. But looking at you both now..." "Now we're both exactly who we're supposed to be," Ethan finished, smiling as Thunderbolt circled back to them, nickering softly. The story of the forgotten champion and his former jockey had evolved into something far more meaningful than a simple comeback tale. It had become a testament to the power of faith, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between horse and rider. If you've been touched by this story of redemption and renewal, share your own experiences with second chances in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a bond so strong it could overcome any obstacle? Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us of the extraordinary connections between humans and animals. As the morning sun climbed higher, Ethan and Thunderbolt walked together across the paddock, 2 old friends who had found their way back to each other, proving that sometimes the greatest victories happen far from any finish line.